Good afternoon, and welcome to all of our guests and all of our alumni around the world. And a special welcome on this, the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. And for those of us in the United States, we're also celebrating Administrative Professionals Day, so welcome. My name is James, and I'm joining you from New York City. In my role as Senior Director of Alumni Relations, I'm privileged to get the chance to connect with over 500,000 living alumni around the world on a regular basis. Today, it just so happens we're connecting online. There's more than 50 of you on the line this afternoon, from colleges such as Stern, CAS, Tandon, SPS, and many more. I'd also like to share with you that today we have a graduate from the class of 1971 joining us, who will soon be celebrating her 50th anniversary as an NYU alum. We also have graduates, two, from the class of 2019, who will soon be celebrating their first anniversary as an NYU alum. So quite a range, and we're excited to welcome you all this afternoon. A few housekeeping matters. You have all been muted to allow for ease and flow of communication through the chat and Q&A function. To continue that flow, please use the Q&A function to submit questions this afternoon. This afternoon's topic is one of critical importance today, as we are all likely working from home. How do we adjust? How do we maintain productivity? How do we manage ourselves, our teams? But also, it presents some really interesting questions about the future of work. How will this time of COVID-19 impact or change our work once it passes? To begin that conversation, I am so thrilled to introduce you all to my colleague, Grace Cosachov Protos, the Executive Director of NYU's Worklife office. In this role, Grace leads a team providing programmatic, educational, and one-on-one consulting and resources to faculty and administrators at NYU. The office also looks at policy solutions to work and personal life integration across the university. Prior to joining us at NYU, Grace was the regional administrator for the US Department of Labor's Women's Bureau, an agency devoted exclusively to promoting the advancement of working women. In preparation for our time together, Grace shared with me that in this role at the US Department of Labor, she was both an employee who regularly practiced telework, as well as a manager who managed remote employees. So she has a lot of experience to provide us. And of course, prior to joining the Women's Bureau, Grace was a senior vice president at McKinsey Partners Incorporated, a corporate advisory services firm where she worked on corporate mergers and acquisitions. She's also previously taught at Columbia University. Welcome, Grace.
Thank you, James, and it's really nice to be here today.
We are so excited to have you. One thing that we wanted to begin our conversation with this afternoon is thinking about where we are today. How do you think our working from home practices that have been catapulted upon us in the last 6 to 7 weeks are impacting the way in which we're all working on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have to say that prior to this pandemic and for several years, there's really been an increase in employers thinking about and incorporating a work-life lens into the way that work gets done. So thinking about how these conversations get done, thinking about how we need to think about work-life integration and the needs of our populations. And this has been sort of changing, I would say, in the last many years. And the research is out there. The research has shown that, the more that companies and organizations consider work life and the personal needs of their communities, of their employees, the greater the outcomes both for their employees and for their businesses. So it's sort of a win-win. We'd started to see quite a bit of sort of a movement, with large companies and mid-sized companies really taking on some best case practices to demonstrate that they were listening to the needs of their workers and responding to the needs of their workers, both from the policy perspective, from the practice perspective, from the cultural perspective. And, this was as a result of the labor force evolving. So for quite a number of decades, if you looked at sort of the demographics of the labor force, maybe in the 60s or the 70s, you would see policies that were in effect then that are different now, or some policies that still exist that really don't support today's workers. There's been a great shift in the demographic of our labor force, and, to the tune of more than 50% being a part of the labor force for women. So women are, at least half the workforce today. I would say that many of those women, about 70% of working women have children under the age of 18. So that gives you an idea of that struggle that people have with childcare and work. We see many more single parents. We see a lot of caregiving of adults. That's been increased significantly as well, whether or not you're caregiving for an adult, a partner, or you're caregiving for your parents, either in your home or away. There's been sort of a big shift in just caregiving, looking at childcare. So it also now incorporates adult caregiving. This is the first time we're seeing 4 to 5 generations in the workforce. So that is a huge shift in the way that work gets done. We see same-sex couples as families. We have expansion of families where it includes living together with, people who are not part of our biological relatives. And people are living longer, they're working longer, they want to work longer, or they need to work longer. And technology has also really sort of catapulted the change really quickly. And so what we see really is, as a result of all of these changes, we see a demand on some of the issues that people face in the work environment. Caregiving being one of the big ones, child and adult care is a huge one, but also when, where, and how work gets done, right? So, if I'm taking care of somebody and I can't work the traditional 9 to 5 hours, but I want to, stop and pick up my kids from school and to make them dinner and put them to bed and then continue working, that is something that we have seen really a demand from employees, a need for them to really sort of decide how, when, and where the work gets done. And we've seen a lot of different conversations in the work environment, right? From the more personal level to, have somebody or hear somebody say, I'm sorry, I can't make a 9 o'clock meeting because I need to be doing X for, my life. And then we've certainly seen the demands of the great need of federal and state and city policies and employer policies to come and respond to some of these needs. And so that really brings us to sort of today, right? We're thinking and trying to find ways. In fact, this is one of the reasons why this office exists, is that it's here to respond to the needs of NYU faculty and administrators, to respond to the great needs that they might have given all the demographics I just shared with you, and to think about ways that we can better support them. We can think about the policies that work and don't work, or perhaps the policies that we don't have, or to consider supportive services, consultations that we might vet for them, resources that we can connect, even thinking a little bit about benefits. We're not under human resources, but we certainly have a connection with human resources and a relationship and a collaboration. So as we hear needs, we can also share with other areas of the university. But we're now fast forwarding to this pandemic, which really lurches everybody into a very different space, which is, remote work, given everything that I just shared with you. So, you're caregiving at home, you're trying to figure out your day-to-day activity, and it's been incredibly challenging. I think that from our perspective, from the work-life perspective and the university perspective, we're still trying to meet some of those challenges, provide the supports, really listen to what people need. So hearing quite directly from our audiences and what their needs are, and respond to those needs. So that means really everything from providing supportive services to connecting them with current resources that can respond to them, to even thinking about what the future looks like in a couple of months as we're navigating this new normal in our lives.
What do you think the future looks like as we continue to navigate this? I mean, one thing that particularly struck me across the last few weeks when I was having a number of conversations with
Mhm.
both my team and my colleagues and my supervisor is that, right now, what we are experiencing is not necessarily the traditional working from home, right? If we were able to just work from home, we could gather with friends in the evening over a cup of tea. We could go to the theater on the weekends. The environment that we currently find ourselves in which we happen to be working from home, is a little bit different than a traditional working from home experience. So I'm curious how you think this may impact the future of where we are headed, not necessarily at NYU as an employer, but as sort of a wider workforce.
Well, the first thing that strikes me is just how nimble people really are. At the end of January, a new policy came out. NYU announced a new telecommuting policy, and that had been a conversation that had been going on for quite a long time. And to have that policy come out was really, really exciting. To think about how we were going to take that policy and impart some really good practices with managers to think about how they were going to share, how they were going to start implementing telecommuting with their teams, and to give them some resources and some manager tips. All of those conversations were really sort of at the ready and on the table and happening. And now, of course, like you said, this is not normal telecommuting. This is not I'm choosing or I'm electing or I'm asking to telecommute. This is I'm mandated to work from home, with everything that means in your personal life, right? So what my personal life looks like is very different than yours and other people that are on this webinar. So I think there are a number of skills that we have to really sort of bring to the table. For a long time we've been talking about EQ and thinking about the emotional part of working, whether you're building a team or you're a peer or you're a manager. Thinking about how you manage differently is really important. How you participate is very important. And when I say that how nimble we are, in the first week of working remotely, one of the things that I felt very personally, I know my team felt, was this crisis mode, right? We were in crisis. We were responding. We were all working from home. We're responding to a crisis. Week 2 still felt like a crisis. Week 3 felt like less of a crisis. By then, we were understanding Zoom. We were, using technology. We were chatting. We were having check-ins. And I think those are the kinds of things that the future really holds, is, us being a little bit more nimble. I will say, listening to the news, it doesn't sound like this COVID-19 virus is just going to go away. It sounds like, we may get back to work in our physical spaces and then may need to remote work at some point in the future again, but we'll know how to do that a little bit better. And so I think being nimble is critically important. I would say for managers, though, there are a couple of skills that are going to be really essential. And I call them soft skills, but they're really leadership skills. And I would say it's building trust. It's understanding what your team needs. It's really listening to them. It's being realistic. It's asking, when can you work? When can't you work? What are your needs at home? And are the deliverables reasonable for you? I think all those questions are critically important. But obviously, building a community remotely is a little bit different than building a community when you can meet and you can gather in a conference room. So I think all of those skills of bringing people together, building a community, thinking about your own agentic actions, so thinking about how you manage and how purposeful you are and intentional you are, is really important. There are also a lot of practical skills that I think we're needing to navigate in this new remote reality, which is prioritizing, reprioritizing. I think we really need to be on top of our schedules, our calendars. I personally have a calendar that incorporates blocks of work time and blocks of personal time, so that I can make sure that I am taking care of myself and I am stopping and I am stretching and I am trying to really incorporate aspects of what I want to focus on for myself into my daily calendar. And so that is going to be something that we're going to have to really hold closely to us. I think anxiety is high, depression, we're going to see, more depression, more substance use. And I think it's going to be critically important for people to learn how to set boundaries, how to prioritize, how to take care of themselves, and focus on well-being is going to be really important. And finding an employer that understands that these things are priorities.
I think so much of that just rings so true. And I think part of it, for me at least, is so far as, this space that I'm welcoming all of you into this afternoon is my home. And that is a very private space to me, a very personal space. And in some ways, many of us around the world, no matter what employer we happen to be working for, are shifting our connotations and associations of space and what that means. And I too find that, prioritizing and reprioritizing, I have a calendar similar to yours insofar as I do block time, even during the hours of 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. To go for a walk, to clear my head, to do something that is not on this screen at this exact moment in time. And I think that's critically important. And I do think that, as managers, we are also, it is incumbent on us to make sure that our team knows that that is something that is not only okay to do, but is encouraged to do. And I fear that maybe where the state of work was 10 or 20 or 30 years ago was a little bit different, right? It was a little bit more, you had to be physically in the office between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. Monday through Friday. And that is shifting, right? I think in an earlier conversation that you and I may have had, we talked briefly about, managing for productivity, right? In terms of, it doesn't necessarily matter where or when the work is getting done, but as long as, the quality of the output is of a high grade and is done on time, I think is really important. One thing that you mentioned earlier that I thought was particularly interesting was building the sense of community and trust within a team. Of course, there's no silver bullet to do that. One of the great benefits that we have when we're, together in person is coming together for communal celebrations such as birthdays or even today, Administrative Professionals Day, having that opportunity to come together and celebrate the staff on our team and all that they contribute to it. I'm curious as you think about, the future of work, and if we begin to become more nimble and come in and out of teleworking policies for a period of time due to COVID-19 or possibly, I hesitate to suggest, but maybe even another pandemic at some point in the future, we're going to have to balance that with a increased employees' desire to do this, regardless of whether there's a pandemic or not. And I'm curious if you have any tips or ideas about how to build that community within your team when you're not all physically able to gather together.
Yeah, I think we're doing it. I mean, I think that people are really, I always think that there's always this reaction, right? You hear, something happens and there's reaction and the pendulum swings a certain direction and then it starts to normalize. And I feel like we're going to get there. We're going to get to where normal is. Right now, as a manager, I can tell you, I try different things. We have a weekly meeting. I have individual check-ins with people. I have what I call open office hours. So I basically just open a Zoom link and I'm on the, I'm on air or whatever you want to call it, on camera, and available if people want to drop it if they have any questions. I do spend a lot of time caring for people, managing people, and really trying to understand what they're going through. There is a fine boundary. I mean, there is a boundary, or you have to sort of understand that you're still, maybe need to respect people's desire to be private. But, really understanding and having sometimes those hard conversations about when can you work is really important. And, we do manage to stay connected. In the first couple of weeks, we were meeting very often. It started to feel a little bit too much. So I was, trying to really sort of gauge what people needed and shifting again, trying to be nimble to what's needed. So the flexibility is sort of built into, we make a decision today, and if it doesn't work tomorrow or the next day, we change it. And so that's actually really helped. There are lots of things that are going on Zoom right now. Obviously, socializing is going on, and we use chat to sort of stay in touch and feel like we have more of a current, ongoing conversation. There are a variety of ways, I think, to stay in touch, but really it's the human element, right? It's people coming together and talking in a real way that helps people. So I think we can do that. We learned to do it via phone, we learned to do it via email, we're learning to do it in a different way now. And thankfully we have the technology that supports it. So I think that's the best use right now, is to find ways to continue conversations and think about what is it that the team needs right now? How are we engaging? Or maybe we're not engaging, and what should I be doing?
Yeah, I think that's particularly well timed and placed as we sort of continue in this environment for at minimum another few weeks, likely another few months at best. For those of you on the line, I'd like to invite you to use the Q&A function to submit a few questions if you'd like. Please also just include your name and your class, your school and your class year if you're comfortable sharing that. It's always nice to get a sense of where the questions are coming from. In the meantime, though, while we source some of those questions, I did want to bring up one of the best articles I think that we both have seen in the last couple of weeks and months that has come out of the Chronicle of Higher Education. The professor Aisha Ahmed at the University of Toronto had a fabulous piece earlier in, I believe it was March, titled "Why You Should Ignore All That Coronavirus-Inspired Productivity Pressure." And in it, there was one particular line that struck me. She wrote that now, more than ever, we must abandon the performative and embrace the authentic. And I'm just curious, what do you think about that? How does that shape the work that we're doing on a regular basis?
Yeah, I'm so glad, James, you brought up that article. I have to say that article actually changed the way it really shifted my thought about not only the duration of this, wrapping my head around the fact that this is really the new normal. We're not going back to work tomorrow. We may not go back to work in the next month. And even if we do go back to work, there is a new normal that we're going to be living for a little bit of, for quite some time. And so that article really helped me sort of get to that. I do think that that there are a lot of things we're going to be grappling with, in terms of sort of this new normal, and I really think that managing is going to be very different, and our expectation for what we want of our teams is going to be very different. I can't expect people to continue to work the same way they were working before. They just can't. And that's the reality. There are people on my team that have significant challenges now working from home. They're homeschooling. They're taking care of other people. It's too difficult. So, we have to be authentic about, they have to be able to come to the table and share what they're capable of doing. I need to be flexible as a manager to understand what we can and cannot take on as a team. In the back of my mind, and at the end of the day, I work for NYU and I have priorities and there are things that need to be done. But, it might mean having to train two people to do one job. It might mean having to cross sort of those boundaries of, what people, how they work, when they work, and, really shifting sort of jobs around slightly. I think people need to have flexibility, and I think people really do need to be authentic. We're not talking about productivity and goal setting the way we were a couple of months ago. And I think that's the way it's going to be for some time.
In many ways, I sort of think about, our team in alumni relations at NYU and the goals that we had set back in September for, this year for us. Are kind of null and void at this point, right? The environment that we're working in is so dramatically and drastically different than what it had been in September. I think that's important to acknowledge. One question that has just come in is thinking about somebody, presumably maybe, actually, I don't know. I was going to say from a younger graduating class, but not necessarily. But what advice do you have for those of us that are just doing this for the first time? that this feels insurmountable and they wish that they were back in the office. I'm curious if you can think about, if you're going through this for the first time, I want to make clear that this is not traditional telework as we previously went back and forth on, but I'm curious if you have any thoughts as to how to sort of manage or balance that in one's head as we go through this for at least the next few weeks, likely a while longer.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, if you're going through this for the first time and, you're in a new situation, you may not be connecting to people. I think it's really important to get out there and try and connect to people, connect to your peers. It's even important to sort of manage up, right? To share with your manager, what are some of your needs? Probably the needs that you have are also the needs of other people that other people have. So, even having ideas of, how to create more of a community is really helpful. And I would say, have hope. I mean, I think, when you talk to people who are much older and have gone through many different traumas in life and have life experience, you learn from them and you realize that life does go on and people adapt and they change. So this is where we are right now, and we might be here for a little while longer. But, I think just keeping your priorities and your well-being in mind is going to be really essential.
Yeah, I think that's so critical, especially as we sort of begin to get a sense of, how long we're going to be in this environment for. And even once this environment that we're currently in finishes, where we sort of go moving forward. I certainly do want to be respectful of everybody's time this afternoon. I know that we had said 1 to 1:30, and we are at 1:30. So definitely want to, first of all, thank Grace and the NYU Office of Worklife for all of their support for the faculty, for the staff across the university. For those of you that are interested in staying connected with the NYU Alumni Association, follow us at NYU Alumni on all the major social media platforms. Again, if you want to update any of your contact information, please feel free to do so. Of course, the NYU Office of Work-Life has both a website and a Facebook that are great resources. They oftentimes put in some great articles to read. And finally, I, of course, do want to note that all of these virtual events are free to all of our alumni. As we move forward, if you are able to, please consider making a gift to the Emergency Relief Fund. The fund covers any assistance for students that are related to COVID-19 pandemic topics. To date, over 7,000 NYU students have been given grants from this, and it's been over $3 million. So we're particularly excited for our alumni community to share in that. And we're excited to continue these conversations moving forward. Again, feel free to connect with me or anybody at the Alumni Association, J Hurley, Hurley at nyu.edu. And again, thank you so much, Grace, for all of your time and energy, both this afternoon and always at NYU. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, and thanks for inviting me.
Take care.